Lord of the Mysteries Fire of Destruction Chapter 415 to 418. Both men stared at each other, and neither said anything for several seconds. The pressure of discomfort filled the room. Klein suppressed the desire to squirm in his seat. With the spirituality he gained from advancing to magician, keeping the tarot club running was no longer as much of a burden as when he was a clown. He was sure he could now cope with another 2 new members before his spirituality would again be stretched to the limit. With his promotion, Klein's control over this space increased considerably. He finally felt confident that he was ready to face his fellow member from another world. He thought long and hard about how he would organize such a meeting. Would he just let all the members leave except them, and still in their places, would he say, "I am like you"? Or would it be better to prepare a modern scenario that could be easily explained as the meeting point of 2 blessed ones if he made a mistake? In the end, he had opted for the second. Recreating the living room of his home on Earth, Klein made sure not to forget any detail. The television broadcasting the morning program, his console under it, some games, and a view of the city in the distance. This was extremely familiar, something he had seen every day of his life as an Earthling, so recreating this scene in the space above the gray fog was extremely simple. Furthermore, he had also taken the trouble to include a language as easily recognizable as Chinese to ensure everything was clear and without misunderstandings. This should have been enough of a signal to convey what he wanted to say. It couldn't have been more obvious. So why aren't you saying anything and just standing there staring at me? Speak. Shit. Klein felt his heart tighten, his mind shuffling through all the possibilities of what this could mean. The worst of all became stronger with each passing second. Could it be that I was wrong about him? Surely he's not a transmigrator, and everything that's happened was merely a multiversal coincidence. Wait. At the same time as that possibility was screaming from the rooftops, he understood the situation immediately. His face went flat, and he looked at the man with clear frustration. The emotion in his eyes conveyed much better than his words could. Are you seriously messing with me at a moment as important as this, Chariot? Not wanting to play along, Klein finally broke the silence, speaking in Lindbergh. Well, seeing that he had gotten what he wanted, Adrian smiled in victory, his scarlet eyes shining. Winking mischievously, the redhead glanced sideways at the TV and chuckled. Frowning slightly, Klein was already considering whether divine retribution was something he could do here when the man's sudden voice took him off guard. You know, it's a bit racist to think I'm Chinese, don't you think? Astonished and not thinking that anyone would talk to him in his language, the magician couldn't help but tremble with excitement. Chariot had spoken in Chinese. Completely ignoring the previous comment, he also replied in his native language, I didn't expect you to be able to speak it. Were you a fan of Chinese dramas? Chinese was not exactly a language that people learned as a hobby unless they would travel or live there. Maybe Chariot had spent some time in China or planned to live there. There had to be a reason. You don't learn one of the most challenging languages in the world just because. More the books than anything else. So that I can have a physical copy I can read. So, how is it? I never had the chance to speak it with a native. How do I sound? I'm not saying anything stupid, am I? No, it's pretty good. There's a bit of an accent, but you don't sound bad at all. Klein admitted with a slight nod. Even his accent has a certain charm. Maybe this guy is a symbol of sexiness or something. Complaining to himself with a grimace, the fool could only sigh. The redhead's eyes sparkled with amusement. Oh. You mean my voice sounds sexy? Gee, I didn't take you for such a smooth talker, Mr. World. I didn't say that. Quickly cutting the subject before he could continue, Klein could only ignore the blush on his cheeks. Stretching a little and having had enough of playing with the man, the redhead walked over to the sofa. Hey, make some room. I don't want to be standing all the time. Oh, yeah, sorry. Rearranging himself at the other end of the sofa, Klein watched as Adrian rested his arm against the armrest and sank. Luckily I made the sofa a bit bigger, otherwise there was no way he was going to fit in it, he's so big. Klein patted himself on the back. Well, what would you like to talk about? The man's sudden voice brought Klein back from his award ceremony. He looked at the man, slightly confused. Sorry. You went to the trouble of having Mr. Fool modify this place to resemble what I assume is your home. Adrian looked around with genuine interest. Seeing the fool's home was something he didn't think he would ever be able to do. Sighing a little, he turned his attention back to Klein. In a way, the fool and the Scarlet Monarch are alike in that they like to pamper their blessed from time to time. The redhead nodded appreciatively and took a closer look at the games he had and recognized some of them. The fool had good taste. I have to say. Not bad. You could use a god of war, but all in all, fine. Pressing his lips together at the comment, the magician nodded slightly in agreement. It seems that Chariot still suspects nothing of the fool sitting beside him right now. Although he was greatly relieved at this information, Klein also noticed the way the man had spoken. It was as if he, too, knew what this mysterious space was. Not wanting to miss the opportunity to get more information about what he suspected was the reason for his transmigration, he quickly got to the point. It seems that you are familiar with this place, Mr. Chariot. Is there something special about it? I never paid it too much attention. I just thought it was Mr. Fool's resting place. Special is an understatement, Adrian answered honestly, sighing slightly, looking gravely at Klein. I'll make it short. Don't investigate, don't try to discover the meaning, or even try to divine it. This is the ultimate definition of knowing more will infect you. Knowing just the name is safe, but don't even try to investigate any further. Are we clear? I already regret opening my mouth. Klein pressed his lips together uneasily. He hadn't expected this place to be so dangerous. So many times, it had saved him, and he sometimes forgot that this place had withstood the attack of a true god. Nothing safe could ever achieve that. Although he wanted to refuse to agree to listen to the name, he would trust Chariot's words. As long as I only know the name, it will be safe. Don't investigate, don't divine. After that flood of thoughts, Klein nodded somewhat tensely. I understand. What is the name of this place? Adrian smiled calmly. He looked around, and after 7 seconds of silence, he spoke. It's called the Saphira Castle. Klein repeated the name in a murmur, his brow deeply furrowed. Saphira Castle. This place is supposed to be a castle. Where is the castle? In all his exploration of the place, he found nothing remotely similar to that word. But, although it confused him, he would listen to the man next to him and not inquire or investigate further. If Chariot is willing to warn me so many times, it's because this knowledge is really dangerous. While Klein was brainstorming, Adrian calmly observed him, taking this opportunity to get a much better look at the protagonist. Big eyes like a black cat, just as expressive. His posture, although somewhat withdrawn, is also somewhat relaxed, which is the discomfort of meeting someone new. His body is shrunk and withdrawn, but it doesn't seem to bother him, not unlike a sitting cat. After his brief analysis, the redhead couldn't help but smile. How cute. Finally coming out of his trance, whether he knew it or not, Klein turned his attention back to Chariot. The Scarlet Monarch's place is very similar to this one. Are they of the same kind? What's it called? What did I say about asking questions? Do you really want to dance with death? Reproaching the man without meaning, Adrian sighed, it's the same kind. Its name is the City of Calamities. That's a heavy name, Klein murmured in a low voice. If something usually had calamity or disaster in the novels he read, it was never a good thing. Without replying, Adrian nodded mysteriously. It is. Now, enough of that subject. You have already inquired too much, and I don't want to risk dirtying you with my impurity. How can you know all this without anything happening to you? Is it because you're a demigod that it's safe to know? Klein asked, genuinely curious about the subject. Can only a demigod bear what this knowledge brings? You're a bit pushy, don't you think? Adrian looked with one eye closed at the man, who laughed uneasily. Shaking his head, Adrian looked at the boring newscast. And to answer your question, not even a demigod could hold all the knowledge I have in my head. Raising a hand and pointing to his tunic, he continued. Do you think I wear this just because it looks good? No, although I don't deny that it looks good, this tunic protects me from the consequences of my knowledge and keeps my soul together. Without it, I would undoubtedly be the most corrupt being on the entire planet. An aberrant monster that could only be purified by casting the same sun upon me. So the robe is the high-level sealed artifact he uses. Finally finding an answer to one of his questions, Klein wasn't very happy about it. Concernedly, He looked at the man. To keep your soul together. Let's just say that the way I got here wasn't as clean as I would have liked. Adrian lowered his hand and sighed wearily. The cracks in his skin were now so familiar that, at this point, he just ignored them. My soul was horribly fragmented. Into such small and tiny pieces that if it weren't for my robe acting as glue, I'd be dead right now. I don't know what to say. Klein was lost. Does it hurt? Not really. The robe helps with that. The only thing is that I am much weaker against attacks that target the soul than a normal Beander. For example, taking a full-on shriek from a wraith without protection could knock me out for a while or kill me if they take me by surprise. Wraith. It's sequence 5 of the prisoner's pathway. The path controlled by the Rose school of thought. As soon as he finished saying that, Adrian couldn't help but laugh genuinely. You know, this is not at all how I imagined our first meeting was going to be. In what sense, Mr. Chariot? So far Klein could tell that he was enjoying it very much. He didn't see much of a problem. In the sense that this is more like a class than a gathering of earthly relatives. Placing a hand on his chest and looking painfully at the detective, who froze, Adrian murmured pathetically. Is that all I am to you? A mere teacher you can consult and then throw away. Ah, what pain. The cheeks of the more petite man exploded in shame, but knowing the man as he did, he controlled his embarrassment. Nodding slightly in his direction, Klein couldn't help but let some of his embarrassment escape. I'm sorry, Mr. Chariot. I got carried away by the desire to know a little more about this world. I hope you'll forgive me. Why are you so respectful? We're from the same place, you don't have to keep that up here. Coming out of his depression as if by some switch, Adrian complained a little. The corners of Klein's mouth rose a little, and he smiled amusedly. It doesn't bother me so much to be a gentleman. It has a certain grace. Meh, I've always found those things annoying. Rolling his shoulders indifferently, the redhead smiled at the dark-haired man. Since you call yourself a gentleman, why don't we start over? Getting up from the sofa, Adrian extended his right hand towards Klein with a gentle expression. In this world, I am Adrian Kenway. A citizen of the Fasak Empire born on September 21, 1327. But in my previous life, my name was Joa Nahuel. A Paraguayan who failed as a fighter and tried to study architecture before coming here, born on December 1. It's a pleasure to meet you. Although the man's words stunned him a bit. Being a gentleman and not wanting to leave his fellow man on the ground, Klein quickly got up. Placing a hand on his chest and bowing slightly, he smiled, too. In this world, I am Klein Moretti. A student of history born in the Loan Kingdom on March 4, 1327. Since the guy had been aware of what had happened in Tingen, Klein saw it as a complete waste of time to try to lie. Usually, saying his dead name to a stranger would repulse him, and he would do anything to avoid it, but in this case, he didn't care at all. This is the trust between transmigrators. Thinking those words in his heart, he quickly added. But in my previous life, my name was Zhou Mingrui, a laborer in southeast China, born on the same day. Pulling his hand away from his chest and squeezing the man's large hand in front of him, Klein's smile grew even wider, bordering on the ridiculous. It's a pleasure to meet you, Joa. Adrian's gaze softened. It had been a long time since anyone had called him that. It brought back good memories. The same to you, Joe. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. The same to you, Joe. The ridiculous smile on the magician's face trembled as his eyes became a little watery. He repeated that name to himself so as not to forget why he got up every day. Hearing that same name, the only thing he had left of his home, coming from someone else's mouth, someone who came from the same place and, on top of that, in his native language. Klein almost lost control of himself. But being someone experienced in dealing with extreme emotions, he recovered quickly. Looking away from the man's scarlet eyes, he motioned for him to follow him. Moving from his living room to his kitchen, Klein invited Adrian to sit down. Coffee or tea? Seeing where this was going, the redhead smiled amusedly and nodded. Coffee, please. With his second favorite drink ordered, he sat at the table. The magician nodded slightly. Returning to his handiwork, he simply grabbed the requested item from the void. A cream-colored cup with some steam was placed in front of the redhead. I hope you like it. It's the way my mother used to make them, Klein said, sitting beside him with a cup of tea. These drinks are just an illusion. They have no caloric or energy value, he added. The gesture is still appreciated. Taking a gentle sip of the coffee, Adrian smiled softly. Remind me to invite you to eat one of these days. I can cook you a dish from my country, and you can do the same with yours. It will be a good way to remember our home, don't you think? While the idea sounded extremely tempting, Klein couldn't help but feel a little reluctant about it. Is that a good idea? Won't it attract attention? The larger man shook his head as he sipped his coffee. I'm not saying it has to be now or soon. We can organize and do it in 2 months, where it won't look so strange. Besides, with how I paint my identity as Harvey Wayne, no one will blink if I invite a detective to lunch. Going out with his guard every weekend to the theater, always being with her and even living together. The idea that Harvey Wayne was a bit weird was already being planted. I wouldn't mind. It's been a while since I cooked something from home. It's a good excuse to do so. Klein closed his eyes, and a variety of dishes he could cook flashed through his mind. Opening them again, he continued. You said you were from Paraguay. Isn't that the country that faced off against 3 other countries at the same time and lost? Brazil, Argentina, and Bolivia, weren't they? Having been a qualified keyboard warrior, Klein considered himself to know something about everything. It wasn't difficult for him to remember the name of one of the participants in South America's bloodiest war. Argentina, Brazil and Uruguay. The War of the Triple Alliance. And although we lost, we survived. Adrian calmly corrected, the war against Bolivia happened more than 50 years later. We called it the Chaco War, and we did win that one. Finishing saying that, the redhead mischievously winked at the dark-haired man. We Paraguayans are hard to kill. Oh. Nodding slightly, Klein took a sip of his tea. While we're talking about wars. Adrian raised his cup and turned it around with interest. Why do you keep saying I'm a demigod? Cough. Cough. What? Choking on his tea, the detective looked incredulously at the man beside him. You're not. I barely arrived in this world at the beginning of June this year. How am I supposed to achieve that? Even with the support of the Scarlet Monarch, that's impossible. Adrian laughed at the situation. Right now, I'm just a harmless Sequence 6 conspirator. Far from being recognized or even compared to a saint. Wait, you've only been here a month longer than me. Tilting his head slightly to one side, Adrian looked innocently at the detective. I never told you. Oh, my fault. This new information was even worse to Klein, who put his hand to his forehead, his mind threatening to break under this influx of information. How come he knows so much then? I doubt that the Scarlet Monarch, in the state he is, can give lessons every day at 7 o'clock, so he must have got it some other way. But how? Was the way he transmigrated different from the way he did it? Grunting a little, the magician sank deeper into his chair, one hand covering his face and the other making sure the cup didn't spill a drop in a great and spectacular display of balance. Sighing exasperatedly, Klein put the teacup back on his plate. He covered his mouth and rested his elbow on the table. Has anyone ever told you that you're extremely annoying? Adrian smiled mischievously and looked at his coffee with relish. Every day. Peef. Klein tried to fight it, but in the end, he just laughed a little, looking exaggeratedly tired. If I end up losing control one day, it will undoubtedly be your fault. Don't give any bad signals, you bastard. Ignoring the annoyance that had arisen inside him, Adrian only playfully patted Klein on the back. Don't worry. I'll make sure that never happens. Rolling his eyes at that silly line, and inwardly thanking the man for controlling his strength this time, Klein looked deeply into the amber liquid in his tea. After a few seconds of silence, he finally spoke. Hey, Joa. Can I ask you something? Go ahead, shoot, Adrian said disinterestedly as he looked at his black coffee. Have you managed to discover a way to get back home? Klein understood the message and could only sigh sadly. I see. Not even you were able to discover anything. It's not that I haven't discovered anything. Adrian began gently, causing Klein to raise his head suddenly. It's just that I can't say it. You're still too weak. Enlightened, Klein swallowed saliva. You mean that the knowledge of how to get back home is not safe? I never said that. Adrian suppressed with a sigh. What I'm trying to say is that the reasons we're here go far beyond just going home. What I've discovered is not something I can just tell amid sequence meander. This is something only angels can carry, and even they are in danger. Not even the angels are safe. Mumbling softly, the dark-haired man narrowed his eyes. Not even those who were supposed to be addressed with their excellency and he, she. Not even beings that surpassed the human being were capable of resisting information. Every day, this world became much more terrifying and crazy. With all these problems, how did it even stay standing? Shouldn't it have been destroyed a long time ago? Before the formulas were discovered and the method for moving forward, safely, established, the monsters advanced, consuming everything in their path, making them crazy, bloody, and extremely dangerous. How is it that human beings were able to survive that? Not to mention this planet. In part, Klein knew the answer to this. Thanks to Joa's request and Sun's information. The creator who created everything. When he rose, the ancient gods fell one by one. Without a doubt, that creator was the light of humanity. Although Klein was curious to know what happened to such an existence and was sure that the man in front of him had the answer, he would not inquire or ask because he knew that the answer would remain the same. You are still weak. He could ask that only by advancing in the sequences, so he left that aside and asked another question. Do you know how you transmigrated? The ritual of increasing luck brought him to this world and gave him access to the Saphira castle. Maybe if he knew how Joa transmigrated, he could learn more about how to return. Perhaps he also performed some ritual and said the honorific name of some mysterious entity. The corners of Adrian's lips trembled slightly, and he closed his eyes with a sigh. I read a novel. You're joking, right? Klein looked stunned. Feeling a sudden wave of embarrassment, Adrian decided to defend himself the best way he knew how to, throw the towel at someone else. Hey. At least it's not as bad as Huang Dao. That idiot transmigrated because he bought a silver plate. Huang Dao. Klein blinked a little confusedly before his eyes lit up. That's Russell's real name. It was a relatively simple name for such a notorious man. Yep. Adrian exploded his tongue as he sipped his coffee. What about you? How did you end up in this hole? Faced with the sudden scrutiny, Klein looked away as he raised his cup of tea. I did a ritual to increase my luck. A loud slap sounded at his side, and Klein turned to see the red-haired man rubbing his face. Oh monarch, give me patience. If I tried to do a ritual of any kind, my mom would kill me and exorcise me right there. At least Russell and mine was bad luck, but yours. Oh fuck. You literally played with fire and got burned. Klein's cheeks turned red, and he could only cough uncomfortably. He had already realized the stupidity he had committed once he had deepened his studies with old Neil, knowing that the chant in the ritual was the honorific name of a mysterious entity. But at least that made much more sense than what Joa was saying. How is it possible that he had transmigrated into this world by reading a novel? Perhaps the content of the book was unique. With that in mind, his question was quick to follow. Joa, what kind of book was it? What was in it? Is there anything in it that caught your attention, or is it perhaps strange? It was a web novel. I read it pirated because I would not pay $500 for pages I can't touch. Saying that the redhead couldn't help but laugh ungracefully. Maybe that annoyed some existence. You dare to consume my writings without paying the proper sacrifice. Your soul is mine. How stupid. Grumbling at the end, he looked at the look Klein gave him and could only close his mouth. Both knew that when taking things from existences, it was necessary to pay a corresponding sacrifice. So, his joke could very well be the truth. But the redhead doubted it was as simple as that. So, leaning back in his chair, he sighed and looked at the kitchen ceiling. But yes, the content of the book was special. It was about a fantasy world, set in the distant past where people obtained powers through potions and rituals, where knowledge was dangerous and much more lethal than many of the deities that ruled the planet. It was clear that the author based it on Lovecraft and Bloodborne. Very good story, by the way. That world sounds a lot like this one. Klein murmured, disturbed. He had read many cases like these in various novels. People who read books often find themselves trapped in the stories, often without explanation. If it turned out that they were in a book, the information Joa could possess was much greater than he could imagine. He could have all the secrets in the world. Perhaps the book you read was a glimpse into this one. Did you read the future? How did it end? The only thing it had in common was the power system and some similar deities. The redhead shrugged. And I wouldn't know what to tell you about the ending. It ends like any other story. The protagonist embarks on a new adventure into the unknown. There was supposed to be another book the following year, but as you can see, I couldn't read it. Sighing, the redhead placed a hand on Klein's shoulder for support. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but even in these situations, there is no manual to tell you what to do and how to proceed. At his words, Klein could only sigh, something he had been doing a lot recently now that he realized. Don't worry, Joa. While it would be very useful if there were a manual to tell us what to do, it would certainly be something I couldn't read even if I wanted to. You know words. Patting his back one last time, Adrian finally removed his hand. Grabbing his cup back, he looked at the television in the distance and at the date on it. Joe, you transmigrated from 2018, didn't you? Yes, why? Klein calmly took his tea, somewhat surprised by the question. In turn, he couldn't help but worry. He didn't like the way the man was looking at him. His fears were confirmed the next second. Because I transmigrate in 2023. The man's words were like a knife stabbed into his heart. Crack. His cup shattered on the floor, and Klein turned slowly, his expression broken in horror. What? I'll assume you've also been reading the pages of Emperor Rissel's diary that we gave to Mr. Fool. Adrian said calmly, I've been a bit busy, so I haven't been able to send many more. I didn't think much of it either. Most of the pages I have. They're not very different from the ones I gave before, in the sense of escapades. Adrian grimaced before continuing. You've noticed it, haven't you? The time dilation between your transmigrations to this world. Not trusting his voice at the moment, Klein just nodded. That was a problem he had noticed almost immediately. Rissel appeared more than 100 years ago, and he had only recently appeared. Such a difference had always worried him. And now his worst fears were confirmed. Time kept passing. Klein murmured with enormous anguish, I've already lost 5 years. Luckily, at least now, he knew that time dilation on Earth was much slower than here. With more than 100 years from Rissel to him equaling more or less 5 years on the other side. Obviously, not counting the previous transmigrator including him, the time dilation would be completely screwed up. But that didn't console Klein at all. He had still lost 5 years with his family, at a time when they needed him by their side. Is his mother even alive? She had a terminal illness for which she had only just started treatment. With his father already being somewhat older, could he even have worked these years to pay for her treatment? It's not like his health was much better, either. He got sick easily and was stubborn as a mule, not letting himself be helped unless he was already hallucinating. Point 1. With that combination, Klein couldn't help but fear the worst. That once he found his way home, there would be no home waiting for him. Quote. Adrian said nothing, he just placed his hand on the man's shoulder in silent support. Klein didn't comment either, he stared at his broken cup of tea, his gaze unfocused and lost. It was about 3 minutes before the magician finally stirred again. Raising his head slightly, he gave the man next to him a small smile. Thanks, Joa. He didn't expect that having someone else in the same situation as him would help so much, as horrible as it sounded. Klein was happy that he was no longer alone. Unaware of his thoughts, the redhead patted him on the back a few times. Don't mention it. We transmigrators look out for each other. Smiling sideways, Adrian brotherly slapped Klein's back, knocking all the air out of him. Arg. Really? Giving him a strong look, Klein held his back with a grimace. That had hurt. The redhead shrugged his shoulders without feeling the least bit bad. I had to get rid of the sadness that was left. You're a bully. Who's so evil as to hit someone who's down? Klein complained bitterly, but the corners of his lips rose slightly. Easily noticing this, the redhead's lips turned up into a smirk. Oh, do I have to take out the bitterness, too? I can hit you harder if you want. I won't be so gentle anymore. Klein's expression trembled a little, and he looked at him strangely. Does everything you say have a double meaning? Adrian winked knowingly, that's the point. Where's the fun if I can't make people uncomfortable? How old are you? 15. Only a child would say that. Klein blushed a little at the comment. Adrian rolled his eyes disinterestedly. I was 20 before I transmigrated, and I've always had this side. They always told me to grow up, but I never listened to them. Quote. At his comment, Klein froze. Slowly, he turned his body. The movement was so mechanical that it looked like the rusty gears of a grandfather clock. You were 20 before you transmigrated. He murmured with an unknown emotion. Just turned, Adrian nodded. Klein said nothing for a moment, just blinking like an owl. After a few seconds, he just said, "You're younger than me." He wasn't referring to his age as Klein Moretti because although he was older, he was only a few months older. No. He was referring to his original age. Joe Mingrui had been born on March 4, 1995. If he subtracted Joa's age before transmigrating, then he would have been born on December 1, 2002. I'm 3 years older than him. He really should be my junior. Wait. He transmigrated in 2023, so if I add up that time, I'm 7 years older. Almost 8, in fact. With a cloudy gaze, Klein looked at the ground in defeat. Someone more than 7 years younger than him was his senior. So this is what Russell meant when he said the other transmigrator had to be older than him. This feeling is, oh goddess. I hate it. At this comment, Adrian's expression twisted into a grimace, and his gaze became extremely judgmental. What is it with Asians and age? You're obsessed with it. Who cares if I'm younger? What matters is that we're in this together, right? And my senior is more mature than me. Good job, Klein. Ashamed of his actions, he could only smile apologetically. Sorry Joa, it's just something personal. Don't take it to heart. If it hurts that much, we can pretend you're the senior. I don't mind. Shrugging his shoulders, the redhead looked disinterestedly at his empty cup, wishing there was more coffee. Honestly, that would be much more humiliating. Do what you want, I'm not forcing you to call me big bro either, that's more Huangdao's thing. He would no doubt rub it in your face. He's quite a character, isn't he? Unable to help himself, Klein laughed softly. Gossiping and talking behind the back of such a character was quite fun. And a slut. I can't even imagine how many bastard children of his are out there. The promiscuity of the Intesians disgusts me. Adrian complained with disdain. Having been raised in a Christian family, he respected and treasured purity, something special that should not be given to just anyone. That the emperor had been like that and continued to do so after he was married repulsed him enormously. If I ever see Russell, I'm going to act like his mother and reproach him for being so promiscuous and perverse. I'll give him such a hard slap that even his former partners will feel it. Adrian promised with all his heart. Klein nodded in complete agreement. It was good to be free, but the emperor had taken it to such an extreme that it would come as no surprise if more than one passenger had been caught, in the sense that it would not be unusual for him to have acquired some disease or other. His escapades are something. Adrian looked sideways at the man. Without wasting a second and changing his expression, he said, it wasn't her mouth. It was his mouth. Klein's cheeks puffed out, but it was too late to use his clown powers. Peef. Ha ha ha. That one was undoubtedly one of the most disturbing and funny pages he had read about the emperor, the only time the great emperor Russell Gustav was surpassed in his perversion. Reading that was a bit traumatic, but I can't help but imagine the face he made. Oh, the horror. It must have been magnificent. Adrian tried to imitate a similar face. His face twisted bitterly as if he had eaten something extremely sour or salty. His eyes turned into raisins, and his mouth opened so wide that his gums showed. It was an expression of pure horror and disgust. Klein, who was already struggling to control himself, lost all the progress he had made. Oh. Stop. Ha 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 ha. Seeing such a strange side to the always stoic and reserved man, Adrian couldn't help but play a little more. So, snorting a little, he added mockingly. I swear that if I find a page that mentions that pegging isn't bad, I'll lose it. PFFF. Huff. Huff. Do you want to kill me? I could hardly breathe at the end. Klein gave the man a stern look, who only had a mischievous smile. It's not my fault that it's so easy to make fun of the great emperor. What was he thinking when he did all that? Having no idea how to respond, Klein could only raise his arms in ignorance. One of life's great secrets, isn't it? Quote. The smile on Klein's face became a little tense. Giving himself an idea of what the man was thinking, Adrian could only sigh. Don't feel bad about making fun of that pervert. Although I have no idea where he is, I'm sure he's alive. Someone so arrogant and without counting, the protagonist of this era, the redhead remarked with his fingers, someone so full of himself won't die so easily. If we want to find that old man, we just have to keep looking for his diary, right? Isn't that why Mr. Fool is doing it? Of course. But talking so badly about someone who isn't here isn't very nice, is it? Using his clown skills, Klein just nodded. Speaking of diaries, Adrian looked around and, placing a hand on his chest, bowed deeply to the great confusion of his companion. Before the other could ask him what the hell he was doing, Adrian quickly spoke in apology. I hope you can forgive my test a while ago, Mr. Fool. While handing over such a page from the diary was highly disrespectful, I had to make sure you still had your humanity. This is not something the Scarlet Monarch asked me to do. I did it on my own abolition. If there is any punishment or reprimand, I will bear it all. Such sudden words startled Klein, and he could not help but look at the man in a daze. What are you talking about? When you disrespected me. Oh, right. That page. When Klein remembered the time he almost lost control of his mask while still in sequence 9, his eyelids fluttered for an instant. Plus, although he had already gotten over that and left it behind as just another chariot episode. The man's words indicated that it was not merely luck that led him to do what he did. Of course. Now that I know he knows Chinese, he can also read the pages of the diary. So he knew exactly what he was giving me. With these thoughts in mind, Klein said nothing, but using his control over this space, he let the voice in his head speak. It's not a problem. The mysterious voice of the fool echoed throughout the room, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Adrian sank even deeper into his reverence. Thank you so much for your mercy. I swear it won't happen again. Waiting a few seconds in silence for a response, the redhead sat up and wiped away a layer of sweat that had fallen down his forehead. Phew. That was a close one. Seeing that now was a good time, Klein quickly questioned what had happened. Well, what do you mean by the humanity of the fool? The redhead looked at him sideways and calmly explained. As you may know, when we ascend to sequence 4 we acquire divinity. We cease to be human and become beings of legend. As we climb the sequences, these forms mature until we completely abandon our humanity and become complete mythological creatures, angels. Being already completely separated from human beings, these beings lose much of their emotions and become more divine in nature. With far fewer emotions and less appreciation for life, they become oblivious to the world around them. Of course, maintaining their humanity will help to avoid this, but it all depends on the Beyonder itself and how they cultivate it. Beings like Mr. Fool, who have been asleep for so long, undoubtedly have more divinity than humanity. My test was solely for the purpose of testing the level of humanity. Pausing for a moment, Adrian laughed awkwardly. It was a complete success. Mr. Fool's humanity was much richer than I thought. If I manage to break his mask with something as silly and ridiculous as that, then everything will be fine. Giving me such a perverted and tasteless page was to test me. What kind of crazy and suicidal test is that? Klein controlled his expression with all his might. The more he thought about it, the more he couldn't help feeling that it completely fit the redhead's style. Unaware of his thoughts, his Earth companion sighed and shook his head sadly. Although it seems that Mr. Fool has regained a lot of strength, he is still quite weak. The lack of anchors undoubtedly means that he has to fight much harder to maintain it. Anchors. What is this guy talking about? Is the title of Fool something related to ships? Swallowing his doubt, he quickly questioned it. Anchors. They are the prayers and beliefs of the people. Adrian replied calmly. From the level of angels onwards, one needs to have a base of believers in order to maintain their sanity and themselves. Without that, they will only be able to lose themselves. Unable to fight against the will of the characteristics awakening within them. I assume you know what the characteristics are, don't you? Seeing that the man nodded, he continued. Why do you think the gods make churches, Bibles and spread their religion? All these efforts are not to show who is the greatest or most important. It is because they need these anchors to maintain their sanity. Ignoring Klein's second freeze, he looked around him heavily. Considering that Mr. Fool only recently reappeared, his anchors are undoubtedly few. But also, considering how gloomy and mysterious the seer pathway is, it doesn't surprise me that he can stay sane for the time being. So this is the truth of religion. It's not because the gods want to be praised, but because they literally need to be in order to maintain their selves. Now he understood much better why, when he accepted the Scarlet Monarch's deal, the latter only spread his honorific name and not that of the fool. He needed those anchors to maintain his state. Considering how gentle and kind he was, not to mention mischievous, it is not incorrect to assume that the monarch retained his humanity well. After a few moments, Klein gave a gentle nod. The path to the divine is much bloodier and full of madness than I thought. That's the way this world is for you. Adrian closed his eyes and shrugged his shoulders. That's why it's important to maintain your humanity when climbing the sequences. It's what makes us, as, our shield against the corruption of divinity. If we lose it, we lose ourselves. We would become indifferent to everything. To those we once called a friend will just be another human that we see deteriorate without blinking or feeling anything. The things we fought for would lose meaning, and only a cold shell of what we once were would remain. But don't think greater humanity is better, this is also a form of corruption. The only way to stabilize your state once divinity is reached is a balance between the two. Neither can be greater than the other. While a little more humanity is fine, too much will result in the opposite of divinity. Instead of being pure reason without a soul, you will be a madman. Humanity and divinity. It's like water and oil, no matter how hard we try they will never truly mix. Pondering the matter, Klein could only nod slightly. All this information he was receiving was undoubtedly rich and of a high standard, and obtaining it so easily was something he did not believe possible. This is an experienced Beander. I'll keep that in mind. Thanks a lot, Joa. One red eyebrow raised curiously. What do you mean, thanks a lot? The smile on the dark-haired man's face froze. Huh. I didn't tell you all this for free, you know. Where's my money, McFly? Although for a moment he had been scared and almost wet himself, hearing the reference killed all that. Ha ha. Laughing sarcastically, Klein raised his fist and punched the man on the shoulder. At that, the other man just winked. Seeing that he wasn't saying anything, Klein also decided to reveal some of the information he had. Although it wasn't much, he still considered it important. As the fool, I must uphold the most important principle of the Tarot Club. Equivalent and fair exchange. There was another transmigrator before Russell. He paused momentarily and continued, seeing the man's lack of reaction. According to the Emperor, they created a tower somewhere in the world. Do you know anything about it? I was wondering when you would bring that up. Adrian was not surprised that Klein knew of another transmigrator's existence. Russell had written about his experience climbing the first floor of the tower in his diary. He had certainly written many more as he climbed, it was only a matter of time before the fool discovered them too. I am aware of this transmigrator. I can only say that he was undoubtedly the most unfortunate between the three of us. Why is that? Because if what I think is correct, our earthly companion appeared at the beginning of the second epoch, together with the creator who is venerated in the City of Silver. Klein frowned for a moment before opening his eyes wide. Wait. You mean the Angel of Silver? Being the fool's chosen one, it was not unusual for him to know this too, so he was not concerned about hiding it. That same guy. Sighing, the redhead rested his chin on his palm. I have no idea what happened to him. The only thing left of him was the tower you mentioned. You say that as if you've already visited it. Klein quickly noticed the change in the man's tone. And I did. I completed the first floor on August 30th. Guess what the challenge was? Something that took Russell so much effort, this guy completes it on the first try. Something to be expected with how daring he is. If he completed it on the first try, it must be something he's a professional at doing. Russell is not from a path with aggressive powers, he is from the Savant pathway, which, according to the Nighthawk documents, does not have powers as aggressive as Joa's. Russell depended more on artifacts, potions, and charms, and even so, it cost him a lot. So for Joa to complete it so easily, it must have been because it was something his destructive powers could do. Lampooning a little, Klein placed his hand on his chin in deep thought. After a few seconds of brainstorming, he thought he found his answer. Defeating a monster or an evil cult. Isn't it like those towers or dungeons in novels? It wouldn't be unusual for it to be. It was one of the most cliched and commonplace things there was. Perhaps this mysterious transmigrator had rather poor taste. Eep. Incorrect. Making the high-pitched error sound with a mischievous smile, he laughed a little incredulously and said, it was to complete the Easter egg from Shadows of Evil. The magician's happy expression broke into a strange grimace. You're telling me that the first floor of the tower was to complete a Call of Duty zombie map? Hey, the best zombies of all. Don't forget it. Adrian pointed a finger at Klein and stared at him. My point still stands. Without changing his expression, the magician replied. The redhead shrugged his shoulders disinterestedly, your loss. Besides, it wasn't an exact copy. It was incomplete in a way. Klein frowned. In what sense? Power-ups didn't appear the whole time we were there. There was also only one soda machine. I didn't try the box, but from its appearance, it looked like a trap. The bosses and murals had also changed. Getting up from his seat, the redhead did not take his eyes off Klein. Can I show it? Knowing what he was referring to, Klein played the part of the blessed and closed his eyes. After about 9 seconds he opened them and nodded. Mr. Fool gives you permission to do so. With the permission of the owner of the server given, Adrian quickly displayed the image of the broken murals along with the monster he had faced. So that's the Angel of Silver. Klein murmured, looking at the figure covered by the robe. Then, his gaze fell to the shadow of it with the large number of eyes that seemed to be looking at him. He recognized those eyes. The true creator. It's complicated, Adrian replied calmly but did not elaborate. Klein looked at him for a moment before nodding. Now, turning his attention to the second destroyed mural. Any idea who he's fighting? From the appearance of the true creator, I reckon it was during the fourth epoch. So it could be the Orthodox gods. Quote. Again, no further explanation was given, but Klein did not express his doubts. He just looked at the last image. At the boss monster that had replaced the Shadow Man. Looking at the monster's name on the screen, Klein looked at the man in confusion. Chef who lost control. Suppressed. Adrian nodded. The tower has a way of making the floors fair. If you are a sequence higher than the floor you are on, your sequence will be suppressed to the floor level, and you will only be able to use the abilities of that sequence. The others will be sealed until you complete the floor or leave it. What level is the first floor? Sequence 7. I'm not sure which path the chef is on, but his sequence has to be 6 or 5, or higher, for it to need to be suppressed. Klein paused for a moment, and after considering it for a few seconds, he held out his hand and a thick stack of yellowed papers appeared in it. These are the Emperor's pages that Mr. Fool managed to put together. I think you should take a look at them. Frowning slightly, Adrian took the pages in his left hand and began to flip through them, reading them quickly. He spent no more than 8 seconds on any one page before moving on to the next. At one point, he stopped reading and stared at a page. Squinting his eyes, Adrian reread the page with scrutiny. Why are you showing up again, bitch? Less than greater than. April 5th. Mistress not so straight as a board, or as she prefers me to call her, Mistress Amelie, has come to congratulate me on my future marriage to Lady Matilda. Less than greater than. Without saying anything, the red-haired man turned the pages of the diary with that name and handed it to Klein. Hold them for a moment. Without waiting for an answer, he continued reading the following pages. His hand paused again and his vision froze for a moment. Less than greater than. June 15th. This is the 5th week of travel in search of the new continent. Normally, I wouldn't write this early, but today, we came across something extremely interesting. There wasn't much wind, so some of our seafarers and windlass decided to have a little swim. It's nothing strange, we already know how much those gill-less fish love the water. The depth those guys can reach still amazes me. Well, it turns out that one of those seafarers found the remains of a sunken ship. We've dropped anchor and are now in the process of salvaging whatever managed to survive. A little spoiler. From its looks, it's a 4th epoch ship. Less than greater than. A Tudor Empire ship graveyard. A mirror that turned one of Russell's crew into a musical monster. Adrian's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened a little more. These pages weren't set aside. Again, after a while, he found something else that wasn't there before. Less than greater than. The 16th of December. I managed to contact the pathetic fellow who's trapped in the storm and was lost in the darkness. Although there was something he added as an additional piece of information, Mr. Dorr said that it was during this time that the hidden sage was born. Is it possible that he was part of whatever gave birth to this evil deity? Less than greater than. I still remember this page of the diary. I'm sure this information about the hidden sage wasn't there. The origin of the hidden sage had always been a mystery that the fandom had tried to decipher. The biggest theory was always that he was the uniqueness given life. Adrian was also inclined to believe that. But this little detail, that Mr. Dorr may have participated in his birth, cast all that into doubt. What really happened with the birth of the hidden sage? That not even the participation of the King of Angels of the Door pathway, who was almost as strong as the gods, was not enough to prevent it. During the War of the Four Emperors. Maybe it's related to the Angel of Silver somehow. The timelines match up. I know he was active during that time, so maybe it was his fault that happened. The conspirator's ability to relate shone through again, and the redhead felt that, in part, this theory might be possible. These pages were not set aside, but the redhead made sure to save them in his mind for later. Once he had read everything the fool collected, Adrian placed the unimportant ones next to his empty coffee cup and asked Klein to return the previous ones. Did you find anything? He nodded. I don't like this Amelie at all. Her appearing so many times in the diary is not a good sign. Good sign. What could be wrong with her? Klein looked somewhat confused at the page of the diary that talked about the Emperor's escapades with this woman. The fact that she appears so often in the Emperor's diary bothers me. Adrian narrowed his eyes as he looked at the name. Russell doesn't go into so much detail when he revisits a partner with whom he already danced the tango with. He just makes the occasional mention and moves on to another topic, but with Amelie it's different. Every encounter he has with her is always described in depth. It may not seem important, but it's something that, if you look at deeply, stands out a lot. That's not to mention how sexually deviant she is. Considering the times, even by the standards of Intesians, that woman was weird, besides the fact that he met her in his early years in this world. Klein looked at the pages in his hands, briefly rereading Rosel's most recent encounter with Amelie, and frowned slightly. Now that Joa mentions it, it's strange that that woman appears so frequently, and in his early years in this world too. Although, seriously, is it so worrying that someone like Joa thinks there's something wrong with her? The Intesians are weird after all, maybe it's just a coincidence. In the middle of his rambling, Klein's blood and his heart stopped for a few moments. In this world, the more coincidences there were, the worse it got. Finally seeing what the man was saying, Klein looked up from the pages. What do you suggest we do? There's nothing we can do. Quote. The older man was speechless for a few seconds before a faint, "Oh," escaped his lips. Everything they discussed happened over 100 years ago, so it was too late even if they wanted to do something. Whatever Amelie was trying to achieve, she had already succeeded. But this did not discourage Klein. Are you suggesting we investigate her? The redhead's lips rose slightly and he winked mischievously. Exactly. This woman, in Russell's words, was a noble, so information must have been documented. 2 of my men work in the library in Lindbergh. I can have them check its information on the nobility of Intis during the Emperor's reign. Being the largest library in the world, the likelihood of them having information on Amelie was extremely high. But even so, Klein didn't feel safe. He was quite negative. Preparing for the worst was something he had been accustoming himself to do recently. That way, he was not only better prepared for whatever happened, but if the worst happened, he would ensure his survival. What if they don't have anything about it? From the bored way Rosal talks about Amelie, her family wasn't that important, which reduces the chances that information could have gotten here. When asked, the redhead didn't worry at all. If that happens, I'll go to Intis to check. The next entrance to the tower will open there on November 18th, so I can take advantage of my visit to have a look around. So that's why the Emperor said the method of entry was annoying. The entrance changes location every time and you can only enter on a specific day. Klein muttered a little before raising an eyebrow. Was our angel of silver someone with a compulsive obsession? Who knows? Maybe. With how incomplete the tower felt, the redhead doubted it. How do you find the entrance once it changes? Does completing the floor tell you where the next place will be, or do you get some kind of map? A. Compass. It tells you where it is and also works as an entrance pass. Without it, you can only rely on luck to find it. Oh, Klein lowered his head, somewhat disappointed. Would you like to come? Won't it be a bother? Klein didn't accept immediately. He remembered that the Shadows of Evil Easter egg could only be completed in a group of 4. So it was certain that the man had entered the tower with his team. There was no reason to think he wouldn't do the same this time. Why not? The rewards are much better if you complete it in a group. Besides, if you get something we want or want something we have, we can just barter right there. So it even has the dungeon rewards. Klein muttered, a strange gleam in his eyes. Get a grip, Indiana Jones. The rewards are only good if you complete the secondary objectives on the floor. Adrian said with a small smile. Oh. Klein contained his disappointment. And how difficult are these secondary objectives? Quite. First, you have to find the main mission of the floor. Once you've done that, you have to find out what the secondary objective is. Maybe it is not necessary to have the main mission to find it, but I have yet to confirm it. You found the secondary objective, didn't you? Klein asked. Not asked, his eyes flat. The main one was obviously the Easter egg, the secondary one was to stop our dear doctor from stealing the summoning key and save the world from being devoured. Adrian laughed, amused at being caught. We transmigrators have the advantage in these cases. The floors are likely based on certain things from our world. Like video games, movies, series, shit, maybe even books. At the last part, the redhead couldn't help but laugh. I wonder what my expecto patronum will be like, maybe a fox or an owl. That's definitely an advantage. Klein said nothing more. His mind was already planning how he would free up his time for November 18th. Fufu, shaking his head, the redhead looked around and sighed softly. I think my time here is up, I'd better go back. Klein almost asked him to stay a little longer but managed to stop himself in time. This is supposed to be the Fool's special place, a sacred and divine place. Being his blessed one, it was not unusual for him to have certain benefits, but even those should have limits. If it were up to him and he didn't have to act like a god, he would stay here chatting for much longer. Now that he noticed it, without the other members draining his spirituality to keep them here and hiding it. The spirituality it took to keep Joa here was almost nil. It took so tiny that if he didn't know he was here, along with the control he had over Saphira Castle, he would never even notice. It should have struck me that I could keep the tarot club when I was still a normal person. If he had really been a demigod, I wouldn't even have been able to keep him here or even summon him. Cursing himself for missing such an obvious detail, Klein put his self-loathing aside for later and nodded at the man's words. If it's okay with you, I can talk to Mr. Fool about letting us stay a little longer at Saphira Castle after each tarot club to chat a bit. How else would I tell you about the 5 years you missed? Adrian laughed amusedly, nodding in agreement to the offer. Smiling gently at the man, Klein nodded in great appreciation. Thanks again, Joa. The redhead winked. What are brothers for? The older man blinked. Lost brothers. We come from the same earth, doesn't that make us soul brothers? Not answering for a few seconds, stunned, Klein snorted and shook his head. Surely you're not a poet too. Adrian winked again. See you later, Joe. Take care of yourself. If anything happens, don't hesitate to call me. Yes. Unable to help himself, nor wanting to, Klein smiled softly. See you later, Joa. With those final words, Klein cut the connection with the Scarlet Flame. And the figure of the redhead disappeared from the room. Klein looked at the place where the man had been for a while. Although he was now alone, he did not feel lonely.